I woke up to the smell of burnt coffee and the fluorescent hum of my old apartment, and I knew immediately that something was wrong. The ceiling had that water stain shaped like a dragon. The radiator clanked in that specific rhythm that used to drive me insane. And my phone. My phone was an iPhone 8. I hadn't owned an iPhone 8 in 5 years. My hands were shaking as I grabbed it, and the date confirmed what my racing heart already knew. March 15th, 2019. 6 years ago. The day before everything fell apart. I had died yesterday. Well, not yesterday. I had died in 2025 at 33 years old after throwing myself off the roof of a building I used to think I'd own one day. After my life had been systematically destroyed by the man I'd trusted most. After I'd lost everything. And now I was back. I sat on the edge of my bed, breathing hard, my mind spinning through the implications. This was real. The threadbare sheets, the crack in my laptop screen I'd gotten fixed in 2020, the stack of ramen cups by my desk, all of it was exactly as it had been. I was 27 again, broke, exhausted, and about to make the biggest mistake of my life. But not this time. This time, I knew exactly what was coming. And this time, I was going to burn it all down. My phone buzzed. A text from Derek Chen, my boss at Next Tech Solutions. Meeting at 9 a.m. sharp. Bring the voice recognition code, investor presentation, don't be late. I stared at those words, and something cold and sharp settled in my chest. In my first life, I'd been so proud when I got that text. I'd worked 80-hour weeks for 3 months to build that voice recognition algorithm from scratch. It was elegant, efficient, and years ahead of anything else on the market. I'd solved problems that PhD researchers were still writing papers about. I'd brought my laptop to that meeting with a smile on my face, thinking I was about to get promoted, thinking Derek would finally acknowledge my contributions, thinking I'd finally be valued. Instead, Derek had taken my code, presented it as his own innovation, and signed a $40 million investment deal while I sat in the back of the conference room. When I'd tried to speak up, he'd cut me off. Emma helped with some of the implementation, he'd said, like I was a junior developer who'd written a few functions. The investors hadn't even looked at me. That was the beginning of the end. Derek built an empire on my work. He took my code, my ideas, my architecture, everything I'd created in those sleepless nights fueled by coffee and desperation. He became a tech darling, featured in Forbes and TechCrunch. Next Tech Solutions went from a struggling startup to a unicorn valued at over $1 billion. And me? I got a small raise and a pat on the head. Then, when I'd finally worked up the courage to confront him, he'd fired me, blacklisted me, made sure no one in the industry would touch me. I'd spent years trying to rebuild, but every door was closed. Derek had made sure of that. By 2020, I am 25, I was delivering food to survive, living in a studio apartment that smelled like mold, watching Derek give TED Talks about innovation while I could barely afford groceries. That's when I decided to end it. But the universe apparently had other plans. I looked at Derek's text again, and this time I smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. I knew exactly what I was going to do. First, I needed documentation. In my first life, I'd been naive, trusting, stupid. I'd never thought to protect my work. I'd kept everything on the company servers, used company equipment, and assumed that my contributions would speak for themselves. This time, I knew better, Saz. I spent the entire day before the meeting doing something I should have done from the beginning. I went through every line of code I'd written, every algorithm I'd developed, every innovative solution I'd created. I copied all of it to my personal laptop, my external drives, my cloud storage. I took screenshots of every commit, every timestamp, every comment in the code that showed my thought process. Then I did something that would have seemed paranoid in my first life. I went to a lawyer, not a corporate lawyer, not anyone connected to the tech industry. I found a small intellectual property firm in Brooklyn, the kind of place that worked with independent inventors and artists, the kind of place that understood what it meant to be stolen from. I need to copyright my code, I told the lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Janet Rodriguez, who looked at me like she'd heard this story 1,000 times before. Your employer might claim ownership, she warned. If you developed it on company time, fine. I didn't. The lie came easily. I developed it on my own time, using my own equipment. I brought it to my employer as a potential project. I have timestamps, documentation, everything. I'd spent the morning creating a perfect paper trail, backdating files, establishing a narrative that would hold up in court. In my first life, I'd worked on the voice recognition algorithm during company hours, using company resources. But in this life, I'd make sure the story was different. I'd make sure I had an airtight case. Janet looked skeptical but intrigued. This would have to hold up under scrutiny. It will, I said. I'm a very careful person. She charged me $3,000, money I didn't have, money I'd have to put on credit cards I couldn't afford. But I paid it anyway, because I knew what was coming. I knew that $40 million was about to walk through the door, and I wanted my cut. No, I wanted all of it. The copyright was filed on March 15, 2019 at 4:47 p.m. My voice recognition algorithm, my natural language processing framework, my entire code base, all officially registered under my name, Emma Rodriguez, as the sole creator and owner. I went to the meeting the next morning with my laptop and a serene smile. Derek's office was in a converted warehouse in Brooklyn, all exposed brick and industrial lighting and the kind of calculated casualness that was supposed to make you feel like you were part of something revolutionary. There were 15 people crammed into the conference room, including Derek, his co-founder Marcus, and 3 men in expensive suits who I recognized as venture capitalists from Redwood Partners. In my first life, I'd been intimidated by this room, by these people, by the way Derek commanded attention, by the easy confidence of Marcus, by the cold assessment in the investor's eyes. This time, I just felt calm. Emma, Derek said, flashing me that smile that used to make me feel valued. Good, you're here. Set up your laptop. We need to run through the demo. I set up my laptop. I pulled up the code. And then I sat back and watched Derek do exactly what I knew he would do. He launched into his presentation like he'd written every line himself. He talked about the innovative architecture, the breakthrough in natural language processing, the elegant solution to the latency problem. He used phrases I'd used when I'd explained it to him. He described my work with the passion of someone who understood it, because he'd listened to me talk about it for months. The investors were impressed. I could see it in their faces, the way they leaned forward, the way they asked technical questions that Derek answered with just enough detail to sound knowledgeable. This is revolutionary, one of them said. This could change the entire voice assistant market. That's the plan, Derek said smoothly. We've been developing this for months. It's ready to scale. I raised my hand. Derek's eyes flicked to me with barely concealed annoyance. Emma, we're in the middle of... I just want to clarify something, I said sweetly. When you say we've been developing this, you mean I developed this, right? Since I wrote every single line of code in that presentation? The room went quiet. Derek's smile didn't waver, but I saw something flicker in his eyes. Emma helped with implementation, he said, using the exact same words he'd used in my first life. But the vision, the architecture, the innovation, that was a team effort. Really? I pulled out my phone, opened my email. Because I have about 300 emails where you told me to just make it work and figure it out. I don't remember a lot of vision or architecture from your end. Mostly just deadline pressure and vague requests. Marcus shifted uncomfortably. The investors were watching now, interested in a way that wasn't good for Derek. Emma, this isn't the time, Derek started. I also have timestamps, I continued, my voice still pleasant, still sweet. I have version control logs. I have documentation showing every commit, every change, every innovation, all under my name, all during hours when I was working alone after everyone else went home. Derek's smile was gone now, and we can discuss attribution later. I don't think we need to discuss it, I said, because I copyrighted it yesterday. The entire code base, the algorithms, the framework, all of it, it's mine, legally, officially mine. You could have heard a pin drop. One of the investors leaned forward. Is this true? Derek looked at me, and I saw the moment he realized I wasn't the same person he'd exploited for 3 years. This is company property. She developed it while employed here. On my own time, I said. Using my own equipment. I can prove it. I have a lawyer who can prove it. And if Next Tech Solutions tries to use that code without my permission, I will sue for copyright infringement so fast it'll make your head spin. You can't do this, Derek said. And now there was real anger in his voice. You signed a contract. That covers work I do on company time, not work I do at 3 in the morning on my personal laptop because you kept piling more projects on me without adequate support or resources. I stood up, unplugged my laptop. Consider this my resignation, and consider this your notice. If you use my code, if you present my work, if you build anything on my foundation without a licensing agreement, which will be expensive, I will own you. I walked out of that conference room with my heart pounding and my hands shaking, but I didn't let them see it. I kept my head high, my steps steady until I was out of the building and around the corner. Then I threw up in an alley. I'd just blown up my life. I just quit my job with no backup plan, no savings, and a credit card bill I couldn't pay. I just made an enemy of a man who would absolutely try to destroy me. But I'd also just saved myself 6 years of suffering, 6 years of watching someone else get rich off my work, 6 years of being gaslit and diminished and erased. And this time, I had a plan. The first call came 2 hours later. Derek trying to smooth things over, trying to negotiate. I let it go to voicemail. The second call came from Marcus offering me a senior developer position in equity. I let that one go to voicemail too. The third call was from Janet Rodriguez. I just got a very angry call from a lawyer at Next Tech Solutions, she said. They're claiming the copyright filing was fraudulent. Let them claim it, I said. I have documentation. They're going to fight this. You know that, right? They have resources, money, lawyers. I know. I looked out the window of my apartment at the city stretching out below me. But I have the truth, and I have time. Because that was the thing about being reborn with knowledge of the future. I knew exactly how to play this game. I knew which judges would be sympathetic. I knew which journalists were looking for stories about tech industry exploitation. I knew which investors were skittish about liability. And I knew that in 3 months, Next Tech Solutions would try to launch their voice assistant product without my permission, and that would be my opening to strike. I spent those 3 months preparing. I worked as a freelance developer, taking small contracts, building my savings. I networked with other developers who'd been burned by Derek, and there were more than I expected. I compiled a case file that documented every stolen idea, every unpaid overtime hour, every contribution that had been erased. And I waited. The launch happened exactly as I remembered, June 15th, 2019. Derek stood on a stage at TechCrunch Disrupt and unveiled Vox AI, the revolutionary voice recognition assistant that was going to change everything. The demo was flawless, the press was effusive, the tech world buzzed with excitement, and I filed a lawsuit for copyright infringement with prejudice. The tech blogs picked it up within hours. Next Tech Solutions sued by former employee over voice recognition technology. The story had everything the internet loved. David versus Goliath, stolen intellectual property, a scrappy developer fighting back against a Silicon Valley darling. I did interviews, I showed my documentation, I let people see the emails, the version control logs, the timestamps that proved I'd built everything myself. I was careful, measured, sympathetic, a brilliant developer who'd been exploited by an ambitious boss. Derek tried to fight back. He claimed I was a disgruntled employee, that I was lying about the timeline, that everything had been developed collaboratively. But his story had holes. He couldn't produce his own documentation. He couldn't explain why his vision had no paper trail. He couldn't justify why every technical decision matched my commit messages and email explanations. The investors from Redwood Partners pulled their $40 million. Other investors followed. Tech journalists started digging into Derek's history and found other developers with similar stories. The narrative shifted from revolutionary founder to idea thief. Next Tech Solutions burned through their remaining funding, trying to fight my lawsuit and develop a voice recognition system that didn't infringe on my copyright. They failed at both. The company died slowly, bleeding money and credibility until finally, 18 months after that fateful meeting, they declared bankruptcy. But that wasn't enough for me. I'd spent my first life watching Derek build an empire on my work. I'd spent 6 years being erased, diminished, destroyed. A bankruptcy wasn't justice. Bankruptcy was easy. Bankruptcy was clean. I wanted him to feel what I'd felt. So I bought the company, not the whole thing. I couldn't afford that, even with the settlement money from the lawsuit. But I bought the assets at auction: the code base, the patents, the intellectual property, everything Derek had built on my foundation. And then I did something he'd never expected. I made it work. I relaunched the voice recognition technology under a new name, Athena AI. I hired the developers Derek had exploited and pushed out, the ones who were brilliant but didn't fit his vision of a rockstar company culture. I built the company I'd always wanted to work for: fair wages, proper credit, work-life balance. We grew slowly at first, but we grew honestly. And in a tech industry increasingly cynical about founder worship and toxic workplaces, our story resonated. We got press for being different. We got customers who wanted to support ethical technology. We got investors who saw the long-term value in treating people well. By 2022, Athena AI was worth $200 million. By 2024, we'd reached unicorn status, and Derek Chen was driving for Uber. I knew this because I'd seen him. I'd ordered a ride one day, and there he was in the driver's seat, older and tired and diminished. He'd recognized me immediately. The ride was silent and excruciating. When we arrived at my destination, the gleaming office building where Athena AI was headquartered, he'd finally spoken. "I could have made you rich," he said quietly. I'd looked at him, really looked at him, and felt nothing. No anger, no satisfaction, no vindication, just emptiness where all that rage used to be. "You could have been fair," I'd said. "That's all I wanted. Credit, recognition, basic human decency." "I made a mistake," he said, and he sounded like he meant it. "I underestimated you." "No," I'd said, gathering my bag. "You saw exactly what I was capable of. You just thought you could take it without consequences." I'd given him a 5-star rating and a generous tip. Not because I forgave him, but because I didn't need his suffering anymore. I'd already won. But that wasn't entirely true. Because on hard days, when the weight of running a company pressed down on me, when I dealt with difficult investors or impossible deadlines or my own imposter syndrome, I still thought about him. I thought about the version of me who'd jumped off a building because she couldn't see any other way out. That's the thing about revenge. It's supposed to feel satisfying. It's supposed to heal something. But even with everything I'd accomplished, even with Derek's complete and utter destruction, I couldn't fully escape the damage he'd done. I still had nightmares about that conference room. I still flinched when someone asked to see my work. I still kept obsessive documentation of everything, terrified that someone would try to steal from me again. The victory was real, but the scars were real too. It was late 2024. 5 years after the rebirth, when I finally felt like I'd made peace with it all. Athena AI had just closed a major acquisition deal. We were expanding into healthcare, education, accessibility technology, all the things I dreamed about when I was young and idealistic and thought code could change the world. I was at a tech conference giving a keynote speech about ethical innovation when I saw her in the audience. A young woman, maybe 25, with dark circles under her eyes and a laptop covered in stickers. She was sitting in the back and she was watching me with the kind of desperate hope I recognized. After the speech, she waited until everyone else had left, then approached me nervously. "Ms. Rodriguez, I'm sorry to bother you, but I needed to talk to you." "Call me Emma," I said. "What's your name?" "Sarah Chen." She hesitated. "I work at a startup in San Francisco. I built their entire back-end infrastructure, but my boss keeps presenting it as his own work." I tried to speak up, but her voice cracked. "I don't know what to do. I saw your interviews from 2019, and I thought, maybe you'd understand." Sarah Chen. I felt something click into place. In my first life, there had been a news story in late 2024 about a young developer who'd committed suicide. Sarah Chen, brilliant and exploited, who'd left a note about being erased by the industry she loved. I'd read that story in the hospital after my own failed suicide attempt, and I'd thought, she was braver than me. she actually did it. But this Sarah Chen was standing in front of me, alive and desperate and asking for help. I understand. I said, come to my office tomorrow. We need to talk. I spent the next 6 months helping Sarah build her case. I connected her with Janet Rodriguez. I helped her document her work, file her copyright, build her evidence. And when her boss tried to launch his product, I helped her sue. She won. Her boss's company collapsed. And I offered her a senior position at Athena AI. Why are you doing this? She asked me once after the lawsuit was settled. You don't owe me anything. Because someone should have done it for me, I said. And because revenge isn't enough. Change is what matters. That became my mission after that. Every time I heard about a developer being exploited, every time I saw someone's work being stolen, I reached out. Sometimes I helped them legally. Sometimes I just offered advice. Sometimes I hired them. Athena AI became known as a safe haven for people who'd been burned. We had a reputation for valuing contributors, for giving credit, for building a culture where brilliance was recognized rather than extracted. And slowly, the tech industry started to change. Not everywhere, not completely, but enough that when young developers started their careers, they knew to document their work. They knew to protect themselves. They knew they didn't have to accept being erased. It was now December 2025, almost 7 years after the rebirth, and I was 33 years old again, the age I'd been when I died in my first life. I was in my office, looking out at the city, thinking about all the paths not taken. In another timeline, I was dead. In this one, I was alive, successful, and surrounded by people who valued me. My phone buzzed. A message from Derek Chen. I hadn't heard from him in years. After that Uber ride, he had disappeared from my radar. I'd assumed he'd moved on, rebuilt his life, found some way to cope with losing everything. The message was simple. Congratulations on the IPO, you earned it. Athena AI had gone public last month. We'd raised $3 billion. It was the culmination of everything I'd worked for, everything I'd sacrificed, everything I'd built from the ashes of my stolen code. I stared at that message for a long time. Part of me wanted to ignore it. Part of me wanted to send something cutting, something that would remind him of exactly what he'd lost. But instead, I wrote, "Thank you. I hope you're doing well." I meant it, not because I'd forgiven him exactly, but because I'd realized something in these 7 years. Derek Chen didn't matter anymore. He was a chapter in my story, but he wasn't the story itself. The story was what I'd built. The people I'd helped, the industry I'd changed in some small way. The story was that a young woman had been given a second chance, and she'd used it not just to destroy her enemy, but to make sure other young women wouldn't need to be destroyed in the first place. Derek wrote back, I'm teaching now. Computer science at a community college. It's good. It's honest. A pause, then, I'm sorry for what it's worth. I know it's not enough, but I'm sorry. I closed my phone without responding. Some apologies don't need acknowledgement. Some wounds don't need to be reopened. That night, I went to the roof of my building, not to jump, but to look out at the city. The same city that had witnessed my destruction and my rebirth. The same skyline that had looked so hopeless in my first life. I thought about the girl I'd been at 27, brilliant and naive and so desperate to be valued. I thought about the woman I'd become at 33, hardened and bitter and ready to die. And I thought about who I was now. Still scarred, still wary, but also strong. A survivor, a fighter. A woman who'd taken the worst thing that ever happened to her and turned it into something meaningful. The wind picked up, and I closed my eyes, feeling it wash over me. In my first life, I'd stood on a different rooftop and thought about ending it all. I'd thought the pain would never stop, that the injustice would never be addressed, that Derek Chen would keep winning while I kept losing. I'd been wrong about all of it. The pain had stopped, eventually. The injustice had been addressed, spectacularly. And Derek Chen had lost everything while I'd built an empire. But more than that, I'd learned that revenge, real revenge, isn't about destruction. It's about building something so good, so valuable, so undeniable, that the person who tried to erase you has to watch you shine. It's about taking back your power and using it to make sure no one else has to suffer the way you did. It's about turning your second chance into someone else's first chance. I opened my eyes and looked out at the city. Tomorrow, I had a meeting with a venture capital firm about funding for a new initiative, a legal defense fund for developers fighting intellectual property theft. Next week, I was testifying before Congress about tech industry labor practices. Next month, I was launching a mentorship program for women in STEM. I had work to do, purpose to fulfill, lives to change, and somewhere out there, Derek Chen was teaching students about computer science, hopefully telling them to value their colleagues and give credit where it's due. Maybe he was a better teacher than he'd been a boss. Maybe his students would learn from his mistakes. I hoped so, because the best revenge isn't making your enemy suffer. It's making sure they can't hurt anyone else. I took one last look at the city, then headed back down to my office. I had code to review, emails to send, a company to run. I had a second chance to make count. And this time, I wasn't going to waste a single moment of it.